What's up, y'all? It's your boy, Shaka Antoine, and today I have my very favorite special guest with me. Savannah, you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Savannah. It's been 3 years. Miss y'all.
That's right, it definitely has been 3 years. In fact, I remember the last time we made a video together, I had to have so many books set up for you to sit on just so you could be in the frame. Now we don't have to do that. She's just as tall as me now, growing up fast. Well, it's been 3 years. 3 years, that is great. All right, so in today's video, we're going to be talking about the tides at the Cod Canal. We're going to look at the tide charts, and basically I'm going to just basically go over just a lot of the different characteristics of the Cape Cod Canal, the moon phases, and how all of that basically affects the tides on the canal. In fact, this video actually came about because someone asked me a question on Facebook and asked if I could do a video about the best tides. So I said, you know what? Here we are. So I'm going to make that video. So shout out to him for making this suggestion for this video. But first, before we go any further, like always, I ask you guys to please smash that like button, subscribe, hit that notification bell, make sure it's on all so that you get notified when I come out with the next video. I greatly appreciate it. It's free, right?
Yep.
So smash that like button, y'all. My purpose for making this video is to basically provide some helpful information about the tides on the canal that should help you be able to plan your trips and target your trips, zero in your trips a lot better. But basically based on the tide and the best times to be fishing the canal, using the one aspect of conditions, which is the tide, and also is basically to help you understand the different characteristics of the canal that directly affect the tide, and basically how the water flow that goes through there will basically set up different conditions to be fishing the canal. All right, so my goal again is just to help you understand how to target fish anywhere on the canal, specifically based on the tide. All right, up next, so Savannah, I want to ask you, do you know what the tide is? What is the tide?
The tide is the waves in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. That's partially correct. Yes.
And the tide makes the helps the fish migrate.
That is another good aspect in terms of when they are migrating, they definitely use the tide to push them along the way, or to ride the tides through different locations. That's a very good point. I like that you said that. But more specifically, the tide is the rising and the falling of the water level, basically. When it says if it's high tide, the water level is pretty high. When it's low tide, the water level is pretty low. So it's that seesaw, up and down. And what do you think affects the tide? Like how is it that the
temperature?
No, not necessarily the temperature. How does the tide get to being high and get to being low?
The wind.
Not so much. One more guess. It's something that we always look at when we come outside the building. Where is the
moon?
There you go. It's the gravitational pull of the phases of the moon is basically what makes the water level rise and fall. New moon and the full moon. And the gravitational pull of the moon. That's basically what allows the tide to rise or fall. Okay. Now, in terms of the tide, what I've noticed that on the Cape Canal, this is the only place that this tends to happen. The tide, everywhere else is called incoming and outgoing. But for whatever reason, on the canal, what they call the tides east and west. Isn't that different? That's so different. And I find that the canal is the only place wherein the name of the tides are different. For instance, incoming on the canal, basically when the water is moving, like say if you're on the mainland side, when the water is moving from your right to the left, that's called an east tide. So if you're on the mainland side and the water is moving from your left to your right, that's called a west tide. Isn't that funny?
Mm-hmm.
But meanwhile, everywhere else, for shore fishermen, it's called incoming and outgoing. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about something that I call, well, not necessarily me. I got this name from Bill Jacobs. He always referred to certain conditions that line up. He always called them an intersection. Some other people, they may call it the magic hour. And what is an intersection? Is when one street meets up on another, right? In the middle is called an intersection. Now, the tide can be a major piece of that puzzle in terms of conditions for bites to take place. And you got your phases of the moon, you got the wind, you got the tide, time of year it is, and location. Those 5 things. And also you can also add in weather, 6. At some point, all those things create the best conditions for a bite to take place. Anywhere you go.
A what?
A bite, meaning like when fish are being caught. We call that a bite. So the tide, the tide is one intricate piece of that intersection. Knowing the right tide to be fishing any given location can be very important. In fact, on the canal, I used to plan my trips just basically on what the tide is doing. So it's very important to know, or at least start to learn and get to know the tides on the Cape Cod Canal. I find that it's probably the most difficult place to grasp and understand the tide because of how vast the Cape Cod Canal is. But now, another point is that even if all of the conditions line up, there's one aspect that can just change all of that, because it doesn't matter if the fish are there, the conditions are right. If one thing is not there, or the wrong type of this thing is there, it changes all of that. What do you think that one thing is?
One thing?
Yeah, what is the one thing that no matter what, if all the conditions are right, you got all the right wind, right tide, right phase of the moon, the weather, the wind, everything is lined up. So, okay, this is it. Bite's gonna happen. What's the one thing that you think that can change all of that?
The intersection or something?
No, really nothing to do with the intersection. It has a lot to do with what the fish eat. Bait. I scared you, didn't I? Bait. What bait is there can just vastly change what's happening. For instance, if there's mackerel there, if there's bunker there, herring, whiting, or squid, then conditions can sometimes go out the door. But the migration of those specific baits, then you can kind of get an idea of what baits should be there. Sleepyhead. I know it's way past your bedtime. Dad's keeping you up just to make this video. Oh, bad daddy. All right. Let's move right along. That is just the basics of the tide itself. One of the aspects of the tides on the Cape Cod Canal that is very important to keep in mind is where you are in the canal. What I mean by that is because the canal is so vast, the tide and the flow of the tide, the water levels that are in the canal can have some really adverse effects. Let's look at certain characteristics of the canal and how the tide is affected there. And what I'm referring to is the delay. So speaking about the delay, there is a delay, which is the distance in delay in distance. And what I mean is that if you're on the east end, if you're on the west end, or if you're on the Cape side or the mainland side, the distance between them is very vast, and there's a lot of water flowing in the canal on a given tide. So the canal basically is 7 miles long. Do you believe that? And I know I've never taken you there. I would love to take you there someday, but from the east end to the west end of the canal, it's 7 miles. Isn't that long? You ever walked 7 miles before? You have? Mm-hmm. You've walked 7 miles.
I've walked 13 miles.
13 miles?
Yep.
When?
In the mall.
In the mall?
Yep.
I said miles. Miles.
13 miles.
Yeah.
In total, I walked 13 miles.
All right. I would love to know how you walk 13 miles. Wait, in one day? Okay. So from the east to the west end is 7 miles, right? 7 miles. Now the depth, how deep the water is. Now I looked this information up, and I found that it said it's between 480 and 540 feet wide. Like say from the mainland to the Cape side, they're giving on where you are in the canal. It can be between 480 and 540 feet wide, which is that's pretty long, pretty wide, I should say. It's pretty far. All right. It's 32 feet deep. I thought it was 70. I don't know. I'm not sure where I got 70 from, but I believe someone told me that it was 70 feet at any given moment. But in doing this research, I couldn't find anywhere to confirm that, which is rather odd. So if you know for sure that the canal can be 70 feet in some places versus what I found here, it says it's only 32 feet. Let me know in the comments below. And the speed of the current, how fast it flows, 6 knots. I knew you was gonna say that.
6 knots?
That is how fast the water is. It can move. Like in terms, like say if I can run 5 miles per hour. Mm-hmm. In terms of like nautical or anything on the water, they don't measure in miles per hour. They measure in knots. So
is it 60 or just 6?
6
That's
knots.
Slow.
Well, it's not really slow. Trust me, I want to tell you. For a body of water to be moving through a given place is not slow. That current there is very strong, which hopefully I'll get to show you one day. But yeah, so knowing those specs, it should give you an idea of what I'm trying to say here, that the canal is vast. So to have water running through there at the speed that it does, at the depth that it does, and how wide it is, it can be challenging to, for at least I found it challenging to understand the tides there. Now, given all of those specs, if you're looking up the tide at any given location there, you're going to notice some very exaggerated delays, I like to say, but you can use them to benefit you. What's important to keep in mind is that when you are trying to check the tide for a given spot on the canal, take note of what point you're using, because of the delay, there is going to be a difference in the tide. So you have to keep note. So like if you're looking up, let's say if you want to fish the railroad bridge, then you want to be looking up the tide for Buzzards Bay. If you want to fish the east end, then you want to look up the tide for Sandwich. But I found that there's about a 2 hour to 2.5 hour delay between the east and the west end. So like I say, if you wanna be fishing at 8 o'clock at Sandwich, right, which is the east end, then that same section of tide will take place on the west end about 2 hours to 2.5 hours later. So about 10 o'clock. So you'll have to consider that. So in other words, what that's going to allow you to do is it's going to basically allow you to fish two different locations under the same section of tide if you time it right. And you'll be able to use that to your advantage, which I'm going to pull up the tide charts. I'm going to pull up the tide charts for you to see exactly what I'm talking about, just in case you don't believe me. But I developed a little bit of a strategy. So like if I wanted to fish, because I'm on a canal, I'm all over the place. So I found that if you wanted to fish two places or more than one places in the same night, or at a given section of the tide, you can have the same tide depending upon where you are for two different locations. And it's because of that delay. All right, so at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the tide charts for two sites that I like to use to check the tide, and also to get a lot of condition information. Right, so the two sites that I would normally be using, the first one is usharbors.com, and the second one is tidesforfishing.com. So let's go right ahead and take a look at that. All right, guys, so first up, what I'm going to do is we're going to pick a location, and then we're basically going to look at the tide for that given place. We're going to note the time that it is and the water level, face of the moon, so forth and so on. But first, let's take a look at tidesforfishing.com. Now, tidesforfishing.com can show you a plethora of information. Sometimes I feel like it's too much information. But if you understand the data and the information that is there, that can also help you decide when and where you'd like to fish. And especially it would help you with understanding the different sections of the tide and so forth and so on, and how that can relate to catching fish. Like I said, there's a lot of information that is here, so as long as you understand it, the data that they give you, it should help you put together a nice bite. I really like the fact that they give you the barometer here, barometric pressure. Let's see here, what else? There's a whole bunch here, but there's only a few things that I pay attention to, like I said, which is basically the tide. Now there are a couple of tide charts that I look at, or at least this display right here, like this one right here. Here you have the up and down motion of the tide, but I look at this one specifically for the fish activity. See this here on the right there? Now they have here 3 fish being very high activity, 2 fish high activity, all the way down to 1 fish or no fish for low activity, where they place it on the sections of the tide there. Now, so like here they got 2 fish at 6 a.m. on this particular day today, which relates
this
to
is 7, right? In between.
This. I'm talking about this one. This is the one I'm focusing on. At around 6 a.m. they got 2 fish, so they said it's going to be high activity. But I find that sometimes this is not accurate. Like I will be there at those specific times, and there'll be no activity sometimes. So I started to notice that for whatever reason, this particular chart here always has the activity really close to low tide, and that's not necessarily always accurate, if you know what I mean. Sometimes it is, but again, I don't pay attention to that aspect of it too much. But it is good to know for sometimes it's right.
I have a question.
What's up?
What is high tide and low tide?
On this chart, right here. This is the highest point.
Like, what does high tide and low tide mean?
High tide basically is when the water level in the canal at the point that I'm searching it for which in this case is Sandwich, which is the east end. High tide is when there is the most amount of water in the canal at that moment. So at 5:49 a.m. Look, you see over here on the left there, you have height. That means that was 8.3 feet above the water line there. Okay, so the high tide is when the water level is at its highest point. Okay, that's high tide. And for low tide is the exact opposite. It's when the water level was at its lowest point. Okay?
Yep.
Did I answer your question for you good enough? Great. All right, so that's one chart to look at there that I like to look at sometimes if I want to, gauge what tides for fishing has estimated the fish activity will be at a given point. I look at it for that, but like I said, I don't find it to be as accurate as it should be. So for the tide now, they have a couple of different tide charts, but for when I want to know the tide on a very specific day, I will go down to this one right here, because this basically has a lot of information that you'll be looking at on other part of the site, and it puts it on the tide chart. So here you have the solar, you have over here the same fish solar activity. You see the numbers of fish. It has that there. It has coefficient. I don't look at that, but it's there. They also have the phases of the moon. You see, in this column they have the phases of the moon. All right, then they have when the sun will be rising and falling, which is good to know. And then the first tide, second tide, third tide, and fourth tide.
What does the sun do for the tide?
The sun is just light, but the sun doesn't really have an effect on the tide. The moon
Why
does.
they show them?
Because it's good to know when it's sunrise and when the sun will be setting.
Just stop fishing?
To either start fishing, or sometimes that can affect when the fish will bite. Sometimes they only will bite during the day, or sometimes they'll only bite at night, or they'll bite at sunrise or sunset.
Okay.
It's very important to know that. Glad you asked that question. One thing about this particular tide chart that can I sometimes dislike looking at it for is sometimes it's very distracting. With all these colors, everything's color coordinated, and just a lot of information. So when I want to kind of dumb it down, and not really dumb it down, when I just don't want such a distraction, I just want to check the tide, I go over to U.S. harbors. Now the purpose of us checking this is because I want to basically show you that 2.5 hour delay. That time, 2 hours to 2.5 hour delay. So let's say this is Sandwich, which is the east end, right? On a day like today, if I wanted to know what the first AM tide is going to be, so that's this column here, right? This is saying that it's going to be high tide is going to be at 4:59 a.m. on the east end, right? So let's check the tide on the west end for the same date and time. And see, you're going to see the difference, right? So, but the feet. So it's the tide is going to be high tide at 4:59 a.m. Feet is going to be 8.8, right? You see that? Okay, so let's look at the west end for the same exact time. So right here. Yeah. This is I just pulled up another page for the west end. See, it says Buzzards Bay right here. That's the west end. All right. So the high tide at Buzzards Bay on the 14th, the AM tide, you see what it says there? 2:39 a.m. See how that time delay is different? Same tide, high tide, two different opposite ends,
but the times are different. So you can use that tip, and not just the time, but the water level as well. You see how there it says 3.8.
Mm-hmm.
No, that's because of the distance.
Oh.
The tide, it moves from one end to the next, so the time that it's going to take to move from one end to the next.
So now I get it.
All right, so at this point, what I would like to do is just show you on the map basically what I was saying about that delay. So you start out up here. This is the east end. This is the west end. That's Cape Cod Bay. Say if I wanted to fish up here at Pips at a certain time, but I also wanted to fish somewhere else down here, let's say Railroad Bridge, then that would give me 2 hours to fish on the east end before I need to be on the west end for that same tide. Whatever that tide is that I wanted to fish it for. Like if I wanted to be down here for the same tide, you have 2 hours to do that. So that's one of the really good things that I like about that delay on the canal. Now, the closer you get can also affect that time. So you have to make sure that you are keen to which tide point that you're using to check the tide. Okay, rather if you're checking Scusset area, the east end, and then Sagamore, Bourne, you have to note the time and just know that there is going to be a delay, and you should use that delay to your advantage. And one other thing to also keep in mind, now this I really could not find, but I was told this and I experienced it. What I mean is that there seems to be a delay between the Cape side and the mainland side. I was told that it's about an hour delay. Now, I was not able to pull that up anywhere online. However, I did notice that. I noticed that, like I say, if I wanted to fish the Cape side, which is this side over here, right? Yeah, the Cape side. I would look up a tide, and it would tell me that the turn is going to be at X amount of time. I noticed that there would be a delay. Now the turn, which is mean that when it's changing from low tide to high tide, there's a period in between, what they call slack, where the water slows down. That tends to happen pretty fast on the canal. The slack period is not as long or exaggerated as some other places I've noticed. But I always would notice the difference between the water level on the Cape side and the mainland side is somewhere around an hour. If you know, or if you can verify that information, let me know in the comments below, because I could not find it as proof, but I have noticed it while being on the canal. So let me know in the comments below if you have any information regards there being a difference from the Cape side to the mainland side at the same location, difference in the time of being down. Well, alright, that's going to wrap up this video. I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to thank my very special guest, Savannah, my lovely daughter, for staying up, fighting through the tiredness and the boredom of this video to make this video with your dad. I appreciate it. I thank you, alright? Is there anything you'd like to say to our audience before we end the video?
Bye, guys. See you guys next time.
So there's going to be a next time?
Yep.
Alright, we'll see. We'll see. Alright, well, if you would like for me to make any other video suggestions, please leave that in the comments below. If you'd like to comment on anything that you saw that I said or didn't say, please feel free to leave that in the comments below. Alright, so please remember to have a blessed day and peace out.